So our recommendations with vestibular activities, this is really kind of what we do in the clinic specifically, is you start slow and you build up. So anytime I'm doing a vestibular activity with a child, anytime I'm recommending vestibular activities, I always recommend start small, short and sweet. You can do more if you're not noticing signs of overstimulation, and you can start to build up every day or every week, but you want to start small versus doing a lot and then realizing it was too much and you're like, oh crap.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica, and this is All Things Sensory by Harkla.
We are both certified occupational therapy assistants, and together with Harkla, we are on a mission to empower parents, therapists, and educators to help raise confident and strong children of all abilities.
On this podcast, we chat about all things sensory, diving into special needs, occupational therapy, parenting, self-care, overall health and wellness, and so much more.
We are here to provide raw, honest, and fun strategies, ideas, and information for parents, therapists, and educators, as well as other professionals to implement into daily life.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey there, welcome back to All Things Sensory by Harkla. We're thrilled to have you here for another episode. I'm Rachel.
I'm Jessica.
And today we're talking about vestibular input and overstimulation and how to provide movement-based interventions that target the vestibular system without making your clients hurl, if we're going to get specific. No, it's not just that, but that is the moral of the story here that we're going to talk about today.
Did you want to read this piece from the research that you included?
Yeah, I just found it was really interesting that there are, most of the research focuses on adults and vestibular challenges like vertigo and dizziness and things like that. But there are increasing, this is quote from this article, there are increasing reports of vestibular deficits and related functional impairments in children. And a recent report by yada 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 suggests that as many as 1 in 5 children in the United States have problems with dizziness or balance, and only 36% of the children who have these problems were noted to be seen by a health professional for the problem. So this is a concern since problems with balance, motor development, gaze stability, and reading acuity have been reported consequences of vestibular challenges in children. So with that being said, I feel like it kind of goes hand in hand with like our 1 in 6 average for kids with sensory processing disorder as well. Like, I'm not surprised that it's 1 in 5. Give or take, right?
I was going to say, I would say it's probably more.
Yeah.
I really would, especially because kids often don't know how to communicate these challenges. So the adults, we don't know if they're having those challenges unless we are trained in sensory integration, and then we can see clinically, we can observe, we can screen for these challenges, know what to look for. But if you're not trained in that, you don't know, and the kids don't know how to tell you. So I bet it's more.
Yeah. Now, if we're going to break down what the vestibular system is, if you have no idea, we do have some past episodes that we'll link, but moral of the story is the vestibular system is located in our inner ears, and it tells us where we are, our position in space. Are we upside down? Are we right side up? Are we moving? Are we stopping? And all of the fluid and the hairs in our inner ears. This is a very preliminary.
Well, I was going to say, from a scientific standpoint, we have the receptors, and when your head changes position, when you turn, when you look upside down, when you look up, anytime you move your head, the fluid in your ear moves and it activates the vestibular receptors.
And that movement, and when those little hairs in your inner ear are pushed down or changed, then that is what's signaling to the brain, hey, I'm upside down, or hey, my center of balance is shifted, so I need to right myself and pull myself back up. You think about putting a kid on a therapy ball and you tilt them to one side and their whole body goes. We want to tilt them to the side, and we want their head to be able to maintain upright. We want them to adjust to positional changes. If their balance becomes off center, we want them to be able to catch themselves, right? For a safety standpoint.
Yep. Vestibular processing, vestibular integration interacts with a lot of different other areas, including the visual system, because anytime your head moves, it's typically directed by your vision because you're looking at something. So there's a huge connection there. We also see a huge connection between vestibular processing and emotional regulation because of what we're going to talk about, which is overstimulation. And then there's a really huge component to muscle tone and primitive reflexes that connect to vestibular processing.
And one more I thought you were going to say was the auditory system.
Oh, yes, because of where it's located. Yes,
exactly.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yes. So there's a lot that plays into vestibular processing. And, when we come at it from a lens of sensory modulation, and we're talking about vestibular over-responsivity, vestibular under-responsivity, and vestibular craving, that's kind of a different avenue, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today, right? So we have our vestibular seekers who are craving movement. They want more input. Those receptors in their inner ear aren't firing enough to say, whoa, you've got enough movement, you're good, chill, bro, versus they're overly sensitive, and the child is super sensitive to different movement. They get motion sickness, they go upside down, they're extremely rigid and uncomfortable. And then the under responders, that means that they crave movement, they crave vestibular input, but they aren't necessarily going out and getting it. They're those bumps on a log that find sensory input elsewhere rather than moving and grooving like our sensory seekers who know they need it and they get it, if that makes sense.
So when we're talking specifically about vestibular activities and activities to activate or stimulate the vestibular system, we're going to do spinning. So it's, going in a circle. We're going to swing, and that can be swinging forwards and backwards, swinging side to side, swinging up and down, which then leads to jumping, jumping on a trampoline, jumping up and down on both feet, a jump rope, rocking. So you think about like a rocking chair, rolling down the grassy hill, really any activity that changes the head position. Driving in a car is a form of vestibular input, especially when you are turning to look to merge into traffic, or turning to look behind you to parallel park, whatever it is. You're turning your head. I personally, as a therapist, love vestibular activities. I love providing my clients with specific, somewhat controlled vestibular activities for a couple of different reasons. Number one, they're fun for most kids. They're alerting, so they wake us up. And then for a lot of kids, it's very regulating, specifically linear vestibular input. So you think about swinging forwards and backwards, that can be really regulating to the nervous system. And I didn't mention this before, but there's a big connection between vestibular processing and interoceptive processing. So when I'm working with a child who is struggling with emotional intelligence or struggling with potty training, vestibular input is a go-to. Also muscle tone. So any of my clients who have low muscle tone, I'm like, let's get swinging, let's get moving, let's get jumping, because we're going to start working on that, building up that muscle tone. And then it helps with that visual vestibular integration. So anytime I have a client who struggles with ocular motor processing, challenges with reading and writing, navigating their environment, we're going to do vestibular activities to help those two systems integrate.
So going along with that, it's really important to know that while vestibular input can be very regulating for a lot of kids and a lot of individuals, it can also be very overwhelming and overstimulating for other individuals. So that means if their feet leave the ground, they're going to be extremely uncomfortable. If they hop on a swing for, think about a park swing for a few minutes, they're going to feel like they're very motion sick. And maybe they get really motion sick in the car because of that mismatch of sensory information. So our goal here today is to teach you, what to look for with sensory overload, and then how you can potentially avoid it, or how you can remediate if you've already, hit that point of no return where your child is overstimulated, or you are.
Because you want to be able to use vestibular input as a tool, as an activity without the overstimulation, without the negative side effects that can happen.
Yes. Should we start? So we're going to talk about some of the like symptoms, signs and symptoms of what vestibular overload looks like. Should we start with my story?
I wanted to.
Great.
I was like, Rachel, why don't you tell the story of that one time?
Let's tell the story. If you've been here for a while, you've probably heard this story like 100 times, but it's a great story because whenever we can empathize with our clients and how they're feeling, it's going to make our ability to provide treatment so much more effective. So years and years ago,
100 years ago. Wait, what is it?
It's been 84 years.
84 years.
Okay, 84 years ago, we were doing some, I don't even remember what it was called.
We were participating in a research study for a new sensory integration test.
It was for the easy, I believe.
We were participating in these tests as part of the research for a standardized assessment.
Yes. So in this, testing protocol, we were coming in and we were having our clients who were participating go through these series of activities, and one of them was spinning 10 times on a vestibular astronaut board.
Well, and we had to do it with each other. There was a group of us.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Sorry.
Let me tell the story. One of the tests was spinning 10 times in each direction. So you do 10 times in one direction, and I can't remember if there was a visual.
Yes.
You had to follow the visual and then spin 10 times in the opposite direction. Before we had our kids do it, we had to do it ourselves. So
we had to learn it and practice it.
Exactly. So I got on the board, and probably Jessica spun me 10 times, and I was feeling very nervous about this because I am a little hesitant on some rotary vestibular input. And I did it. I felt okay. We were thriving. We were moving on. And the end of the day came a few hours later, and we were documenting, and I was so on edge. I just remember being angry.
Well, I remember you telling me later that you were driving home and you were just pissed off.
Yes.
While you were driving home.
Yes. Which is very unlike me to be upset for, absolutely no reason at all. And we put two and two together, and we were like, oh my gosh, it's from all of that rotary vestibular input.
Which wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of things.
Speak for yourself.
It was 10 times each direction.
I thought it was
with a break in between, because you are more sensory sensitive to vestibular input.
To rotary vestibular input.
Whereas, last year going to the fair with Logan, and we're riding all the fair rides, I was able to handle quite a bit of it. Not as much as Logan. He did so much.
But we do get more sensitive in our old age.
Well, but it's not an age thing. It's a movement thing. We move less.
True.
That's a whole nother topic.
True.
All of that to say, one of the signs of vestibular overstimulation can be a delayed response where 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, several hours later, you can feel those effects, and you can feel irritable and angry, nauseous, fatigued, or super hyper. Like, you can see these signs later.
Yes. So a delayed response is important to keep in mind.
Yep.
And especially if you do, work on this vestibular input during your session, make sure that you are telling the family and the caregivers, hey, just so you know, we did these things. So potentially we could see some adverse reactions later on. Just keep me posted, shoot me a message, and let me know if you notice anything.
And here's what you can do if you do notice any of these things.
Yes. Okay, so we've got dizziness, we've got lightheadedness. Of course, those are pretty straightforward. Changes in facial color. Sometimes they may flush, they may be green, they may be pale, they may be red, they may be brown. You really never know what color they're going to be after they get some of that intense vestibular input. We can see changes in their eyes, in their eye movements, in the size of their pupils. We can see them having difficulty with catching a ball afterwards or focusing. If they're doing a sit-down task, it can be really hard to get their eyes working. They might rub their eyes a lot as well. We might see nausea or vomiting. Some kids, I remember early on in the clinic, there was a therapist who was working with a girl who would throw up anytime she would just barely get on a swing and get any of that movement. And then breathing changes, we can see rapid heart rate. We can see them, having a hard time catching their breath, or they're just breathing heavy. So those are some of those more physical signs that we often see.
Yeah, and usually we see those pretty quickly after the vestibular input, typically. Some of the more behavioral signs, which I feel like we can see right away, or these are the ones that we'll see later on, will be the irritability, frustration, quick to cry or meltdown, avoiding. This is what we see often with our kids who are more sensory sensitive and who have maybe some gravitational insecurities, poor postural control. They don't feel comfortable on swings or climbing, so they're going to avoid or refuse to participate. We might see hyperactivity and silliness. I feel like this is a big one that we'll see pretty quickly and immediately. And then like withdrawal or completely shutting down.
Yeah, definitely. And then some of those sensory and motor signs that we'll often see, we might see them get more clumsy. They might trip and fall more often than they normally do. They might struggle with coordination. So maybe normally they're able to catch a ball pretty well, but maybe they are having a hard time catching a ball. Maybe they're struggling to just like walk straight, go up and down the stairs. Maybe they're tripping on curbs. Maybe they're even struggling more with things like cross crawls or jumping jacks that they normally are able to do. We also can see poor posture. Maybe they're slumped down in their chair. Maybe they're resting their head on their arm as well. So those are some of those, I would say common that we can see initially, but also things that we can see down, 4 hours is generally like the span of what we'll see.
Yeah. And then oftentimes what we'll see later on, if it was too much and they were overstimulated, kind of that delayed reaction, going along with some of the behavioral responses would be like fatigue or falling asleep when they don't normally fall asleep, headache, this is a big one, and then increased sensitivity to maybe light or sounds or touch.
Definitely. So recognizing these signs and being able to intervene early is really key. When my son was younger, he was like really sensitive to movement, and you could like see his stomach drop when I'd swing him too high, and you just see like the deer in the headlights and like the grabbing onto the swing. And you really want to pay attention to those signs and make sure that we're not pushing them so high that they're uncomfortable, but also we want to make sure that if they are like loving all the vestibular input and they're at the park and you're swinging them as high as possible, you're not doing that for 20 minutes. You're taking a break, you're getting some heavy work, you're coming back to it. So you really have to find that line of pushing the sensitive ones a little bit more, but then also kind of reining in the seekers a little bit more.
Only when it's needed, though. I think, there are certain times for sensory seekers, sensory cravers, when they need that 20 minutes of swinging.
Sure.
So it takes a lot of trial and error.
It does.
It takes a lot of observation and learning about the sensory systems and sensory integration, learning about the child and what do they actually need, because sometimes they do need that longer swinging time.
For sure. Yep.
That's why our job is so interesting, because there's no cut and dry one size fits all answer when it comes, especially with vestibular input.
Exactly. Yeah.
So our recommendations with vestibular activities, this is really kind of what we do in the clinic specifically, is you start slow and you build up. So anytime I'm doing a vestibular activity with a child, anytime I'm recommending vestibular activities, I always recommend start small, short and sweet. You can do more if you're not noticing signs of overstimulation, and you can start to build up every day or every week. But you want to start small versus doing a lot and then realizing it was too much and you're like, oh crap.
Yeah. Whoopsie.
Whoops.
They've thrown up all over me. Now what do we do?
That's always fun.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear. And then you want to make sure that you're mixing vestibular input with proprioceptive activities or heavy work activities. So, when I'm at home and my kids are swinging and they're spinning, my son is in this phase of, we've come a long way. You're going to be proud when you hear this. He'll spin himself in the hammocks or the compression swing, and he'll put his legs upside down and spin. So then after he, spins, he falls down on the ground, and I say, okay, go push the wall. So he goes over and he pushes the wall, and then he comes back and he does it again. So sometimes adding in those, little proprioceptive breaks can be really helpful to kind of reorganize the nervous system, because remember that proprioceptive input is the all grounding, all regulating sense, and it kind of combats the overstimulation from other senses, specifically vestibular.
And that is the sequence that I pretty consistently use in the clinic when I'm setting up an activity or an obstacle course, a sensory circuit. We almost always start with a movement vestibular activity, and then right after is a heavy work activity. And as we go through our obstacle course, we're doing this multiple times, and that's really where the sensory integration comes in, because when you're doing these sequences of sensory activities, you're teaching the brain and the body how to process it, how to modulate it, and how to work through any challenges.
So all of our products that we make, the dice, the sticks, the cards, they all have that combo of alerting, wake up, vestibular system activation, and then calm down, heavy work, proprioceptive activities. So they really are like the perfect sensory break activities because they include both. And that's how we're practicing and getting that system to have that appropriate adaptive response.
Yeah. Next would be to make sure you are adapting in real time. So, this has happened to me, even knowing what I know 11 plus years in. I'll still have a client who we're doing an activity, we're doing a vestibular activity, and it's a little too much. And so as soon as I can recognize that, then I need to be able to switch and adapt and modify, change what we're doing, provide some really good deep pressure, some really good heavy work, maybe some oral motor work, because that's going to be really regulating, and be able to do that on the fly. It's not part of our plan, but we're going to do it because I see the overstimulation starting, and I want to be able to counteract that to help their nervous system. And really, it's just teaching that modulation. It's teaching the brain and the body what to do and when to do it.
Yep. And then varying the type and the intensity is another helpful trick. So maybe alternating between a linear input, so swinging in one direction. You do that for a few times, and then maybe you spin them, 1 or 2 times in each direction, and then you give them some squeezes, or maybe you bounce them in the compression swing and give them a little bit more prop simultaneously, or maybe they're swinging and kicking their feet off the wall, so they're getting a little bit of proprioceptive input that way. But you're just changing the variety of the vestibular input as well. So when you have to think about it, there's a lot of ways to stimulate those little hair follicles and all the fluid, right?
Get that fluid moving.
Get it moving, right? And we want to make sure that we are exposing our children from a very young age to novel sensory experiences. We want them to have a sensory-rich environment growing up. So especially for our kiddos who are sensitive to vestibular input, if we put them in a blanket swing from day one and they hate it and we never do it again, they're never going to learn to have an adaptive response. So we have to figure out the best way to find that just right challenge. Again, that was my daughter. Hated it. Now she asks for it every single day.
Yep.
So, it's tricky.
It's tricky. It takes a lot of practice. And finally, make sure you are providing time and space to process the vestibular input that you've provided to the child. So if you are doing, a swing activity and you're doing some spinning and you follow it up with a little bit of heavy work, make sure you're giving the child a little bit of time to decompress. Maybe you're spinning them 10 times both directions, and then you're providing them with some deep touch pressure, some squeezes, some heavy work, and then putting them back in the swing, and you're allowing them to move in the swing the way they want to before you do anything else. Again, it's that passive versus active, but giving them time, their brain time to process and modulate that input before moving on. So it's really all about slowing down, taking your time, and not rushing through it.
Yep. I did link some interesting research articles in the show notes as well for you to nerd out on, look into, just a variety of different things. But this article was talking about vestibular and proprioceptive training and its reduction in hypersensitivity or hyperactivity and impulsivity. And the article, there's some blurbs that I wanted to share. It said vestibular and proprioceptive training significantly reduced hyperactivity and impulsivity while improving sensory processing and modulation. While there were improvements in behavioral and emotional responses, there were no significant changes in vestibular function. Vestibular and proprioceptive exercises synergistically reduce hyperactivity and impulsivity in children with ASD, or with our autistic children. So that's something to keep in mind. There is growing research out there. There's a variety of research, but just a few little nuggets for you to take away.
What's your favorite vestibular activity?
Oh gosh. I really like going upside down over a therapy ball, grabbing an item, or pointing at something and then sitting up and completing a task, a functional task that way. Like it because it works on the Moro reflex, the TLR as well.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
Swinging.
Yeah.
We did do this activity recently where we had a fly swatter and we had the colored dots visual chart from A Balanced Brain. And then we had matching colored fish on the floor. And I had the child stand on a balance beam and they would read the color on the chart and then look down and bend down and swat the fish with the fly swatter and then stand back up to read the visual chart.
Yes.
So it was like a 5 or 6 year old. Really tricky, but we're really working on a lot of things. Visual vestibular integration, postural control, equilibrium reactions, some primitive reflexes, ocular motor skills, so much. But it was so fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything with a fly swatter is fun.
You can get that buy-in.
Yeah.
One of the courses I'm taking right now is the visual system. And obviously the guy teaching it, he's an OT, and so he was showing an activity that he did, and he had a child doing the integrated listening system, had the headphones on. I think the child was in a quad position on the platform swing, and they had the heart chart, or the letter chart, up on the wall, and the child was reading the chart, the visual chart, while they were swinging in different positions as well. Again, so simple, but works on so many underlying skills: the auditory, the visual, vestibular, postural control. So again, sometimes taking it back to the basics is really helpful.
You just keep it simple though. So I think overall, we just want to know what the signs of overstimulation are, and we want to know what to do about it. So when in doubt, probe it out and start small with vestibular activities.
Definitely. Proactive strategies. If you have a vestibular seeker, you're going to be providing consistent little snacks, little snackies of vestibular and proprioceptive input throughout the day in order to help meet that need. So, roll the dice and do one of each of the activities: the alerting, the calming. Pick a sensory stick, a blue, one orange. Pick a couple of cards, because each of those have the different activities on them as well. And that way you can have a little bit of both, and we're going to hopefully meet that need throughout the day. And then we're also going to hopefully get our avoiders more comfortable with movement and moving their body.
Yeah. If this episode was helpful, make sure you let us know. Leave us a comment wherever it is that you listen or watch. Make sure you are subscribed. Leave us a review. Take a screenshot and tag us on social media at All Things Sensory Podcast.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. If you have questions, if you want us to answer any questions, you can find that form in the show notes of this episode, or the description, again, wherever you're listening. But yeah, we appreciate it, and we're happy to help you however we can.
Okay, we'll be back next week for another episode.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening to All Things Sensory by Harkla.
If you want more information on anything mentioned in the show, head over to harkla.co/podcast to get the show notes.
If you have any follow-up questions, the best place to ask those is in the comments on the show notes, or message us on our Instagram account, which is at Harkla_family, or at All Things Sensory Podcast. If you just search Harkla, you'll find us there.
Like we mentioned before, our podcast listeners get 10% off their first order at Harkla. Whether it's for one of our digital courses or one of our sensory swings, the discount code SENSORY will get you 10% off. That's SENSORY.
Head to harkla.co/sensory to use that discount code right now.
We are so excited to work together to help create confident kids all over the world. While we make every effort to share correct information, we're still learning.
We will double check all of our facts, but realize that medicine is a constantly changing science and art.
One doctor or therapist may have a different way of doing things from another.
We are simply presenting our views and opinions on how to address common sensory challenges, health-related difficulties, and what we have found to be beneficial that will be as evidence-based as possible.
By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or your child.
Consult your child's pediatrician or therapist for any medical issues that he or she may be having.
This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening.